my crunchy to alt-right pipeline video that I could do an entire video about the dark side of yoga. So many of you commented that you want it, so here you go. Plus it's January, you know, the time when lots of people are making their New Year's resolutions, they're trying to get healthy, so of course yoga is the right thing to do. You've got the warrior pose, people are feeling enlightened, and you get to tie in eugenics and nefarious. Wait, what? It turns out that the much-loved spiritual practice of yoga has been warped by some people throughout history for their own personal gain and to peddle some very scary messaging. Especially when COVID hit, there was a real personal health fetishization, very eugenics leaning, that COVID wasn't real, according to some people, that they didn't need to get vaccinated, and they were also preaching this to their followers as well. Not just recent history with some dark, twisted things happening in the world of yoga, also goes back to the 20th century. I want to make it obnoxiously clear at the start of this video, I am not saying that you are a bad person if you practice yoga or if you teach yoga. There are many different kinds of yoga. I am not saying that you are wrong at all. I'm doing this video to shed a light on some of the bad things which have happened, but also I cannot go through the entire history of yoga. People have spent their entire lives documenting it. People have written entire books about the history of it, and people all disagree on all sorts of stuff, so I'm not going into that. What I'm going to be diving into in this video is eugenics aspect, some of the history, including about sadly a bunch of SA that has happened, so trigger warning there. And some people like Bikram Choudhury had so much that they needed to have said about them that he gets his own section, which I believe would actually suit his ego, which is very overinflated. As you're going to find out through this video, there are sadly some grifters who have risen through the ranks in the world of yoga, but people also do not want to question them, which allows this terrible behavior, this fraud, this SA to continue on. And I am positive that there's going to be people in the comment section defending some of the people that I've raised, and we are really getting into it today in this short video. Very short. Don't look. Patrons, you already have the extended and uncensored version of this video. However, on YouTube, I'm definitely going to have to censor my words because we are talking about some very screwed up stuff. So without any further ado, let's get into it. Yoga's history and cultural appropriation.
I have a yoga mat, yoga pants, and I do goat yoga every Thursday. But there's really important spiritual. Why don't you namaste in your lane? Yikes. Saying that if you can't stand the spirituality of yoga, then you were never practicing to begin with.
Of course, Blair Imani just says things so perfectly. Of course, their Instagram is linked for you down below if you're not following them already. Same as Susanna Barkataki, who was also featured in that video, and they have an entire website that you can go check out, and a book, Embrace Yoga's Roots. She's a teacher, inclusivity promoter, and yoga culture advocate. I see a world where yoga unites us all and excludes no one. She's pretty active on Instagram too, so I'll have that linked for you down below too. Sadly, as this video goes on, you'll be grateful that I'm shouting out some positive people. For the briefest of explanations, yoga is the ability to direct the mind without distraction or interruption, as defined in the sutras of Pattabhi. In contemporary yoga, you'll hear the term to yoke, as yoga is about uniting the mind, body, and soul. Despite what you see when you Google yoga, it's not just a white woman's workout whilst wearing Lululemon. It's a deeply spiritual practice which gets overlooked, or, in all honesty, commodified thanks to capitalism. So you have people wearing the Sanskrit Om on t-shirts or feeling like they have to buy this really expensive gear in order to be able to actually practice yoga. But you don't have to wear specific clothes.
I'm ready.
Are you even wearing yoga pants?
Yoga is about the practice and the intention, not the wardrobe. The marketing, commercialization, and appropriation of yoga has resulted in a lot of misinformation.
Yoga is not just asana or physical practice. It's key to understand, practice, and teach all 8 limbs of yoga.
Blair's at it again. As Susanna Barkataki writes, if a yoga studio or space is treating the practice as a commodity, they are appropriating yoga. Okay, but who exactly invented yoga? Easier question, please, because yoga has a long and complicated history which dates all the way back to medieval times in Hinduism, and yoga also became part of Buddhism and its meditation practices. As Reena Deshpande shares in this article titled, Yoga in America Offer Exploits My Culture, but You May Not Even Realize It, from 2017, she laments how yoga has been twisted in the West to resemble only a workout. Yoga, meaning union in Sanskrit, has many forms, but classically it's an ancient Indian philosophy espousing an 8-limbed approach to conscious living. Those 8 limbs are shown on the screen right now for you. According to Yoga Sutras, classic texts, yoga asana is just one of yoga's 8 limbs. Unfortunately, it has now been glorified glorified to the point that the very definition of yoga has been usurped. The yoga I knew from my Indian upbringing, the spiritual philosophy embedded in everyday experiences, is no longer seen as yoga. Yoga was introduced to the West by Swami Vivekananda when he went to visit the US in 1883. In 1893, he demonstrated yoga at the Chicago World Fair, and this gained yoga even more interest. And there were other influential people who travelled to the US, such as Paramahasana Yogananda, who travelled to the US in 1920 and introduced millions to meditation and Kriya Yoga. He was even hosted at the White House by President Calvin Coolidge in 1927. And no, that's not Coolidge in the photo, that's John Balfour, the second secretary of the British Embassy, because in case you forget, the British actually still owned India until 1947. There's other influential figures like B.K.S. Iyengar, Krishna Pattabhi Jois, Yogi Bhajan, Bikram Choudhury, to name just a few, and we'll actually be getting back to some of them later on because, ooh, there's been some scandals for some of them. As Nadia Gilani shares in this article from The Guardian, classical yoga is grounded in the sage Patanjali's 8 limbs of philosophy, which offers a suggested code of conduct to live in a moral way, as a way for early populations to make sense of the natural world order and find connections between the physical body and the habited world. Today's practice undoubtedly looks different, but the intention was always clear. When we strengthen our relationship with ourselves and understand ourselves more deeply, we are in a better position to make sense of the world and live in harmony with the universe. We all know that yoga's got a very rich white woman aesthetic. I need to share this other part from that article. Sitting in a cafe during a 2019 trip to Agonda, Goa, I overheard a nearby table of entirely white trainee yoga teachers who were attending a hugely popular school. Planning their classes, they discussed what beatsy playlists they might use, and one was wearing a Namaste as t-shirt. Most yoga teachers are white, classes are expensive, they're not accessible. In order to become a yoga teacher, you have to pay for expensive courses, which we will be getting to soon, especially with Bikram Choudhury. But the true essence of yoga as a spiritual practice of self-inquiry has been distorted and repackaged in the West in platitudinal love and light slogans, to the detriment of the many it now excludes, from people of colour who created it to low-income households, older people, children, those who don't have slim, bendy bodies, disabled people, ill and injured people. The list is endless. Like I said at the start of this section, there are yoga teachers who are trying to ensure that yoga is fully accessible to everybody. I hope you now understand that yoga is so much more than just a workout. And the articles are linked for you down below. I always link all of my sources, but we really need to get onto the body fascism and I think before we get into that, let's have a little break. Let's maybe pay me some money for how much I've had to read about SA over the past few weeks, months actually. It's been very dark. Anyway, thanks for paying my bills. The loved yoga. Have you heard about Friedrich Wilhelm Müller? No. What about his alternative name, Eugene Sandow? He's known as the father of modern bodybuilding, and yes, he changed his name because he was inspired by eugenics, you know, the racist and ableist science. He was a German-born British showman who did tours showing off his strength, and he would always be challenging people to fight him. Wherever he went, people strongly admired him.
As a specimen, yes, I'm intimidating. I wanna get started.
He was the ideal, strong, white Englishman. It's important to note that eugenics wasn't only popular in Germany, but it was also popular in Britain and in the USA. And if we're completely honest with ourselves, I don't think that the admiration for eugenics has gone completely out the window. There are some very rich, very influential people who keep on touting all of this eugenics nonsense, even to this day. But they hide it, so then they can't get accused of racism or ableism. But the dog whistles are there. Sandow believed that weakness of the body and spirit was caused by what we inherited from our parents, but that strong discipline and the right kind of breeding could improve our stock. He toured India in 1905, and his self-centered, disciplinary and eugenicist philosophy resonated with yoga innovators at the time. Yoga, whose ancient origin is mired in speculation, was revived in the time of Sandow, inspired by his physical feats. Mark Singleton dived specifically into postural yoga's history, which is different from the rest of yoga's history. In 2010, he came up with the book Yoga Body if you are interested in reading about this further. As the book Conspirituality shares, when they were researching this disturbing link, we did not know that the cherry-picked the superhero themes of Indian yoga gods, fantasizing about becoming invulnerable in body and spirit. We didn't know that Heinrich Himmler carried around a copy of the Bhagavad Gita and conceived the SS as a yogic monastic order. Through discipline, purification, restoring virility, and weeding out all sickness, disability, and sexual deviance, a transcendent identity would emerge. Yuck! As we know, were incredibly concerned with having the perfect, pure Aryan race. So in the wrong hands, the spiritual practice could be manipulated to be something else entirely. In Germany, Jacob Wilhelm Hauer wrote 3 different books about yoga in the 1920s and 30s. And he was allegedly the one that persuaded Heinrich Himmler about the benefits of yoga. As Yoga and National Socialism by Matthias Tietke tells us, SS leaders who were fascinated with yoga, they even used yoga's history and philosophy to justify the SS Captain Jacob Wilhelm Hauer wrote, "Yoga can internally arm us to prepare us for the forthcoming battles," while Commander Heinrich Himmler actually considered the Bhagavad Gita as a blueprint for cruelty. He identified himself and the SS with old Indian Kshatriya caste, and its publicized attitude of unscrupulous killing for one's higher purpose. Himmler enjoyed some old Indian mythology like the Rig Veda. These celebrated the racism of the Aryan immigrating from Central Asia to India, killing and driving out designated inferior opponents. The SS in Germany encouraged its members, including those soldiers who were working at camps, to do yoga as a way to enrich their mind, body, and spirits. Yoga in the hands of was twisted by so-called race experts as a way to justify their pursuit of this ideal Aryan race. It's really disgusting, isn't it? But also, why is this not more widely known? Well, as Conspirituality says, one key reason may be that the post-war marketing of yoga was driven by Indian charismatic entrepreneurs who saw themselves as creating a universal wellness product that would not sell if it were complicated by the politics that the world had just barely survived. And like I mentioned before, it is incredibly worth noting that the British only relinquished control of India in 1947. Like, people were still alive when India was under British rule. That feels so disgusting to me. So to me, it makes perfect sense why people in India would want to have a way to be able to separate yoga from entirely, and also find ways to make money that's not under colonial rule anymore. The people that we're going to be talking about in the next section, who also did terrible things, spoiler alert, they were hugely influential in bringing this new attitude towards yoga to the West. The body fascism that Iyengar and Jois grew up with were theirs to bear privately. Transform all that history and all those politics into a mystery play about the heroic individual's spiritual journey. By the time they became known to European bourgeois of the 1950s, and then the American dropouts of the 1960s, they were middle-aged yoga masters, inscrutable and solitary. They seem to have emerged out of a distant, idealized past, molded by scripture and ritual more than post-colonial struggle or post-war entrepreneurialism. And sadly, there has been a lot of misconduct, fraud, and terrible stuff which has happened in the yoga world from some individuals. Again, it's not everyone that's done this. This is down to some individuals that sadly have ruined a lot of people's lives, as we'll talk about next. Just as a spoiler warning for you, again, this is not going to get too graphic on YouTube, but we are going to be talking about SA in the next section. Let's just have a little break, a little breather, and then we'll get into it. The Me Too movement enters the world of yoga. Tragically, there has been a sort of Me Too movement which has happened in the world of yoga, but worse, it hasn't really been all that well received by a lot of people. People haven't always been believed, and much like what happened in Hollywood, there is a definite hierarchy of power that is in place, and certain people hold an awful lot of power, and so it's better to just keep those people happy to make sure that you and your career aren't completely ruined, because sadly, that's what would happen if you tried to speak out. Sound familiar? And sadly, it was some of the most famous yoga masters that were doing this to people. Some of them were held somewhat accountable, but most of the time, people were fiercely defending them. Still, in the comment section of this video, I promise you are going to see people fiercely defending them even now, even after all of this proof has come out. In the yoga space, as many people do understand, there is a reverence around yoga teachers, around yoga masters, around gurus. People are almost regarded like a dignitary. As Sanjukta Sharma writes, the culture of worshipping a guru or any yoga instructor to the point of divinity is outdated and needs to go. She wrote this while sharing a comic panel by Wandering Hands, which stems from a Me Too movement in Bengaluru. Now, most of the time in the cases we're going to be talking about, it's women from the West, Europeans, people from the USA that have come forward about their experiences. Rarely do women come forward in India because it's a male-dominated field and because of the inherent sexism there, and like I said before, the power structures which are very much in place. There are strong hierarchies in place here, which do prevent people from coming forward. As these comic strips show, the abuse which most often happens is under the guise of, quote, adjustments by yoga teachers. The ones which are being shown here is their experience under the instruction of Mohan Polama. Allegedly, what he did to some of the female students. And it shares how they felt that they couldn't come forward with these issues, followed by people doubting them, saying, this is how we practice. If you don't like it, then leave. And yeah, does this sound at all familiar with the harassment issues which so many of us have dealt with how people always victim blame, with how people say that, oh, you must be misinterpreting something, like, oh, it wasn't that bad, and people using all of this minimizing language. The exact same thing has happened in the yoga world. They put together this comic to help others who may be in the same position that they were, and I have it linked below for you, of course. As yoga scholar Mark Singleton says, there is almost no historical evidence for yoga teachers physically adjusting their students prior to the 1930s Mysore Asana revival. In other words, you can tell someone how to adjust to get into a pose better, to make sure that they're doing this in a more comfortable way, rather than tearing a hamstring or herniating a disc like has happened to people. Worth noting here that Mysore became Mysuru in 2014. And the thing is, whilst yoga teachers are doing adjustments, that doesn't mean pressing your pelvis into someone's whilst you are adjusting them. And it certainly doesn't mean inserting fingers to adjust someone's lowest chakra. Come on. I can't talk about the long list of yoga teachers who have their students, and to be honest with you, I think that the list is much longer, but people are too scared to come forward. You'll understand why when you see the treatment that happened to people when they do come forward. We're going to focus on a few influential people. Started with Yogi Bhajan.
Because aesthetically, here was a man wearing a turban with a beard, in these white flowing robes. It was very easy for him to center himself and create a pseudo-religion where he was the head.
He introduced his version of Kundalini Yoga to the US in the late 1960s because in 1968 he moved over to there because he actually got someone pregnant and tried to escape from his problems. And before he moved to the US, he didn't even teach yoga. People just assumed because he wore a turban and was Indian, oh, well, that means that you're a yoga teacher.
A form of yoga that he claims is ancient, powerful, and previously untaught in the open. But in reality, there was no Kundalini yoga tradition that he could have become the master of. It's an improvised patchwork, literally and figuratively making it up as he goes along.
He went on to become a cult leader, with his followers calling him Sri Singh Sahib.
He would just shout at his students to shake their body.
Okay, shake your body.
I mean, he's referencing things like shake and bake.
Shake and bake.
And he was the director of 3HO, Happy Healthy Holy Foundation, which is still running today, by the way. He had an inner circle of secretaries who would work for him, and also he could just call upon them whenever he wanted.
Teenager anymore.
Looking back, I believe he saw an additional woman, and I thought, is this a back adjustment? And I thought, this is not a back adjustment. Why isn't this other woman, does she know what's happening?
He believed that being gay, lesbian, or divorced were signs of spiritual weakness. He committed fraud and child.
She got slapped, punished, humiliated, forced to stand outside in the cold hours and hours on end.
The children were filthy. They had worms.
A previous secretary of his, Pamela Dyson, came forward in 2020, and she features in the documentary which talks about him.
The survivor accounts in the report detail a host of
Hundreds of people came forward.
A Facebook group was started and the stories just come tumbling out.
And also the person who followed him later on.
Sell every minute of your life for profit. Life is to sell.
Yogi Bhajan says that the business and money are some of the quickest ways to become conscious, and they're the biggest spiritual practices.
But yeah, don't worry, we're getting back to her grift later. Next, let's talk about Krishna Pattabhi Jois.
One living guru of Ashtanga yoga. He's very cute.
I just find when he puts his hands on you, you kind of, give up and let go and say, okay, here we go.
He's credited as being the father of Ashtanga yoga and is incredibly highly respected. As Matthew Remski writes, the fierce and graceful Ashtanga method he popularized has grown exponentially since the 1990s. During that time, a parade of celebrity practitioners helped boost Jois's profile even further. People like Sting, Madonna, Gwyneth Paltrow. Ashtanga is at the center of the multi-billion-dollar yoga economy, one that also includes yoga methods such as Kundalini, Iyengar, and Bikram, the original hot yoga. And there are hundreds of yoga studios worldwide dedicated to Jois's gymnastic religion. Thousands more that offered Jois-derived techniques through classes marketed with popular terms such as flow, vinyasa, and power. Jois assaulted his female students in public and on a regular basis. The women described Jois humping, rubbing, or digitally penetrating their under the guise of adjusting their postures, sometimes whilst pinning them down with his body weight. Like, one brave person who came forward was Karen Rain at the end of 2017. She wrote about her experiences, yoga and #MeToo, towards a culture with zero tolerance for Her website is linked for you down below. I read through all of those articles. She's written so very much. I really do encourage you to read it if you do hold doubts about Jois and about the victim blaming culture, which is absolutely rife, sadly, within yoga. And let's be real, it's still rife everywhere, even though we are so many years after Me Too. It happens all the time. She also graphically explains exactly what Jois did to her. YouTube, you're not seeing this right now, but if you're on Patreon, you can pause the screen right now so you can read it. It's absolutely vile, the stuff that he did. She shares witness testimony and the fact that so many women came forward to her directly, sharing their experiences after having similar ones to what she experienced at the hands of Jois. And the thing is, people were aware of the abuse that was going on. This dates back to the 80s. There are photos of this. YouTube, I can't really show you, but Patreon, you're seeing this right now. Utterly disgusting, and it's just photo after photo. I didn't even want to keep going. This was literally the first things that I was just clicking through. It's disgusting to see. But sadly, people were aware of this. As Jenny Williamson Priest writes, "I'm ashamed to admit that I knew about the sex soon after I first started daily Ashtanga practice 17 years ago. I did see videos on the internet. I did laugh it off and dismiss the furtive, dark gossip in Mysore, India, in the cafes and in practice rooms everywhere, from New York to Singapore to London, and I did turn a blind eye. Yoga gives a lot of its followers a really transformative experience, so people don't want to think that something so abhorrent and horrible could happen, that they just want to shut it off and pretend that it's not even happening, and also attack people if they do come forward. And sadly, this is something which has indeed happened. And some people really do try to rationalize away just being like, well, they was just adjusting you. And it's like, no, you don't need to try somebody to adjust them. You don't need to digitally penetrate them to adjust them in a yoga position. My God. Ugh. And actually, even worse than that, people who were aware of the that he was doing, they still sent their own students to him. So then they were making their students vulnerable to him repeating this on them. It's disgusting. And yes, there are a number of people who have come forward saying, I'm sorry, I should never have done this. But there's also a lot of people who are just defiantly saying, well, he was only adjusting. The classic victim blaming stuff, ultimately, saying that he's done so much good that it doesn't matter if he's done some bad things. He's only human. Boys will be boys and all that other nonsense, right? And not everybody apologized, including the Pattabhi Jois Ashtanga Yoga Research Institute, KPJAYI, as Karen Rain rightly points out in her website. Reinvention would include ceasing all public display of feel-good images and public discourse lauding other aspects of Jois. I don't hear people publicly celebrating all the achievements and merits of Harvey Weinstein right now, and if there were a Harvey Weinstein School of Film Production, probably the name would be changed. Because yes, Jois's name is still plastered everywhere. If you Google him, you will probably only find positive things about him. And Jois also caused injuries to his students by forcing them into yoga positions which were too deep, for lack of a better phrase. They were too extreme. Their bodies couldn't physically get into that position, and so they left with actual injuries. As Katyananda shares, Jois wrestled her into a deeper standing back bend than she was ready for. Her hands were on her ankles, already an extreme position. Jois moved her hands sharply up to behind her knees until she heard an internal rip. Later, an MRI showed a disc herniation. Charlotte Clues was another woman that Matthew Remski interviewed. During one practice, Jois tore her hamstring attachment as he stood on her thighs and pushed her torso into a deep forward fold, with her legs open in a wide V. She persisted through the pain until Jois again approached her to hold her steady as she bent over backwards into a series of, quote, drop backs. He pressed his directly against hers as he supported her as she arched up and down. She had never been touched in that way in that posture before. Clues tells me that she was trained to believe that pain in practice was irrelevant and that injury was a risk in Ashtanga, but part of her also believed that a quote good student who properly submitted to the teacher would not get hurt. This is what I mean when I say it's a cultural issue. One solution that people have given, other than the Institute apologizing and no longer heralding Jois as this incredible person, is consent cards which people can put on their yoga mats. I'm showing them on the screen now so you can see what they look like, which say, yes, you can touch me to make adjustments, and no, please just verbalize what you want me to do, because like was said before, you don't have to touch people to adjust them. It's only been more of a modern thing that people do touch other people. If you are aware of yoga at all, you're probably aware of a man named BKS Iyengar and his book Light on Yoga, which sold over 3 million copies worldwide. But he's not who we're interested in, even though I did write a whole bunch about him for this video, but then I was like, no, I need to try and stick to the script because this video is getting a little bit long, don't know if you noticed. We're going to talk about a pupil of his, Manouso Manos. Manos, a disciple of and right-hand man to the founder of Iyengar, BKS Iyengar, used adjustments of yoga poses as a cover-up to students and to them for such acts, wrote Bernadette Sargent, an independent investigator and Washington, D.C. lawyer hired by the Iyengar Yoga National Association of the United States, IYNAUS, to conduct the probe. But Manos denies any wrongdoing. Of course you do, mate. Okay, but what exactly did he do? This again dates all the way back to the 1980s. My goodness. However, you know, the statute of limitations that had run out, so none of those women that suffer from this were able to come forward. The report includes the stories of women who accused Manos of them whilst they were in vulnerable yoga positions in class, either on their heads, balancing, or straining in a stretch. And I can't even say the things he was doing. Let's just say a toe should never go in there unless someone is being paid a hell of a lot of money. Patrons can see a number of the accusations which were proven to be true against Manos, but sorry YouTube, I can't even show like a real redacted version for you. However, it's worth noting that when Ann West came out with her experience in 2012, initially she was disbelieved by the IYNAUS. The Ethics Committee said in its review it did not find sufficient information to determine that a violation took place, but then the board decided that they needed to do an investigation because there is an appearance that the members of this committee are biased in his favour and cannot decide complaints against him impartially. And guess what? Her claims were substantiated. However, guess what happened to her when she came forward? I'm just going to quote her directly. I have been disbelieved, ostracised, vilified, trolled, isolated, gaslighted, and denounced. I was told I must have, quote, misperceived touch to my own body. I had intimate, private details of my personal life publicly shared. I have lost my privacy and anonymity. I have lost my community of peers. And in her interview with KQED, she said, people were trying to squash my voice. Other women, other fellow students were trying to quiet me and shut me up and shame me. But I kept going because I knew what I was saying was the truth. And then others came forward with their experiences too, and the investigation is a fascinating, if dark, read, and it's linked for you down below. Like I said, all of my sources are linked for you. One of the key things that the investigation found was there was a pattern of that was happening to the students. It's so disgusting, but by the way, Manos is still practicing. Manos can no longer use the Iyengar Yoga name or certification mark in the name of his studio or in connection with his teaching. However, I googled him and I went onto his own website and this is what I found. He has a practice now called the Abode of Yoga, and as you can see, he explicitly states, we teach yoga in the tradition of BKS Iyengar. His understanding of and insights into Iyengar yoga are conveyed with authenticity and precision. And he's doing in-person workshops in California, which is sold out. He's also going to Florida, Pittsburgh, Vienna in Austria, and India. Like I said, there are so many more people I could talk about, but what this is showing is this is emblematic of the culture which is enabled. There is a deep issue when people really are raising yoga teachers and gurus to such a high level that they see that they can not do any possible wrong. And when so much power is concentrated to one person, it creates an environment which is rife for to flourish. Some solutions that people have raised are the consent cards, like I talked about before. That would be a really good first step for people to instigate at their yoga studios. I will again have an article listed for you down below which dives into this a lot deeper. A really good thing to do would be to have a formal certification process. Right now, you can become a yoga teacher by paying for very expensive courses, and then you can go teaching yoga to other people and then do very expensive courses. It can sound a bit like an MLM, but it's not. However, there's no real board certification that happens, like doctors get that. So it creates this environment where all sorts of stuff can happen and you can just move elsewhere and no one will know what's happened, because if that was the case when it came to Manos with the accusations which came out against him years ago, he wouldn't be able to practice right now because his certification would have been taken away years ago. You see, so that's why it would be a really good thing to have in place. And people have also raised that consent training, trauma-informed training for teachers would be necessary for yoga teachers to learn as well. Especially if you're going to be touching people in quite vulnerable places. Think about it, think about your rib cage, your lower back and your thighs. When you're in these uncomfortable and revealing positions, it can make you feel incredibly vulnerable. People often question, well, why didn't you leave? It's just a yoga class. You can absolutely leave. It's not like you're in a relationship. When it comes to such a powerful personal and group experience that a lot of people do get from doing yoga, it creates this environment that this is your community. And like we talked about before, there have indeed been cults associated with yoga. When everybody around you is acting like this is normal, that there is nothing wrong and that you're the weird one if you're feeling uncomfortable, it creates this sense of doubt in someone's mind of, oh, this can't, I just need to understand this is what I need to do in order to be able to do this class. I really want to be part of this community. And if someone has been through trauma, or if they're trying to find a community, or if they've just been through a lot in life, then they're more likely to be vulnerable to this sort of stuff and just, stay the course because everyone else is fine with it. There's clearly something wrong with me. And so you go self-doubting, just like that comic show. This kind of environment fosters to happen. And even if other people are aware of the that happens and they're talking to someone and they feel for them, they're like, I'm sorry you went through that. If you're not publicly calling this out, if you're not challenging this, you're still complicit in it continuing. It's created an environment where it's even harder to break these cycles. And I know that there are a number of people in the yoga world who have written pieces about how they need to break this sort of mentality of holding people up on these pedestals. And I talk about that all the time. We always need to stop that because it really does foster such terrible things to happen. So that's something that some people in the yoga world are absolutely working on, and other people still want to live in denial, which is not just a river in Egypt. Let's get on to the next section where we're talking about someone who some people have claimed to be an egomaniac. Let's have a bit of a break first because I think we all need a bit of a break. Ad gods, what are you going to send to us? Did you enjoy that advert, or was it promoting one of the many things which I blocked YouTube from promoting? Because I would like to know, because I have filtered out so many different things on my AdSense, so maybe that's why I get paid so little for all the work that I do. Anyway, let's talk about Bikram Choudhury.
Highway or the... And everybody would say highway, the best food is no food.
My way or?
Bikram Yoga, the hot yoga style and the superstar who created it. You've probably come across Bikram Yoga in your life or hot yoga. Please tell me if the institute that you've come across is advertising Bikram Yoga or hot yoga, because after we talk about this, you may be side-eyeing them if they call it Bikram Yoga. There's also a documentary about him on Netflix called Bikram, Yogi, Guru, Predator. Very dramatic. Now, it is a good documentary, but it does miss out some key stuff, but it is still good, and I'll be including a couple of clips in here depending on copyright, because Netflix is terrible when it comes to copyright. There was one important thing to note, which is he hates people wearing green, so I'm wearing this color as a sign of disrespect. As Conspirituality shares, currently fleeing US prosecution related to allegations of Choudhury is half strongman, half clownish tycoon, and all egomaniac. He built his fortune on health claims relating to the 105-degree Fahrenheit heat in his practice studios, a protocol he contrived in the 1970s to mimic, he said, the temperature in his native Calcutta, omitting for his Western customers the fact that in India, yoga is never practiced at midday nor in the sun. As it turns out, the most researched benefit of the artificial heat in Bikram yoga suggests that it brings participants dangerously close to heat stroke. Dodgy dude already, am I right? But you don't even know the half of it. He's just terrible. But Bryony, he can't be a bad guy. He apparently worked with Elvis, with one of the Beatles, with President Nixon. He stopped him from having to amputate a leg. Did he really? This grifter? Choudhury would tell students if they did 30 minutes of yoga a day, it's not necessary to spend a single cent on a doctor in your whole life. He says he can cure arthritis, multiple sclerosis, and help the elderly of multiple orgasms. Dude, get out, shush. The main evidence of his claims has always been that he can shout them at people. All Bikram yoga classes are taught according to Choudhury's script, which gives precise instructions for the execution of 26 postures over 90 minutes. But it was because of famous links that he became huge in the USA. Through teacher trainings, which cost about $10,000 per person, and licensing, Choudhury amassed a fortune of reportedly $75 million and a fleet of 43 luxury cars, an image comically at odds with the usually ascetic yoga guru.
It doesn't seem very yogi-like.
Depends which kind of yogi. I'm American yogi.
But even though students completed their $10,000 multi-week course with him, they couldn't open their own practice unless he directly approved them. So instantly it's like this sunk cost fallacy. Literally, you spend $10,000, even if he does some things that you do not like, even if he is you are screwed without his approval to go make money, to be able to have a business. $10,000 is so much money. I can't believe how much it cost. No wonder he made so much money. Without staying on his good side, you were not able to develop professionally. Exposing his predation, or as Anderson, Bourne, and several other women eventually did, meant social ostracism and the end of one's Bikram teaching career. Instead, for years, people excused or turned a blind eye to the behavior as, well, that's just Bikram. Sarah Braun was one of the women who did come forward. She's been on the news and she's featured in the documentary. She shares her experience, but maybe I'll need to keep that just to Patreon. I don't know how much I'll be able to share on YouTube.
It's one posture, standing bow pulling pose, but then he pressed himself into me and started whispering into my ear, what are we gonna do about us? I'm split in half, with my heart dropping down real low.
But it's not just charlatanry or forcing himself on people, it's also racism. Pandora Williams sued him for racial discrimination because he kicked her out of a training class yelling.
She was offended by some of the things she says Bikram said.
Right leg over the left leg. This is called natural Viagra.
His banter during classes is often charged and off-color.
You can have marathon sex. 72 hours non-stop.
Women are bitches and whores. They're here for one thing, to spread their legs and make babies.
He was saying this in front of the whole class of people?
Yes, in front of 400 and some odd trainees.
What happened when you challenged him on it?
I walked up to him and I said, Bikram, you're breaking my heart. That's what I said to him first. Why are you preaching hate when there's so much hatred already in this world?
And what was his reaction?
We don't sell love here, you get out. Get this black bitch out of here, she's a cancer.
Williams was kicked out.
And he also refused to refund the over $10,000 that she spent on the training. He regularly body shamed people.
I still remember the very first class that I took with him, and I was maybe in the second or third row. And I remember we were in awkward pose and he looked right at me and said, suck that fat stomach in, I don't like to see the jiggle jiggle.
And yes, he also women, and when they were brave enough to come forward, he unleashed his entire wrath on them. Is it wrath or wrath? Wrath of Khan? Wrath of Khan. I always said Wrath of Khan. Mickey Jaffa Bowden is so far the only woman who's managed to defeat Choudhury in court. In 2019, a Los Angeles county jury awarded her a total of $6.8 million in damages for a range of charges including unlawful dismissal and harassment. But as alluded to earlier, he fled. If you want to know anything really about his character, here's the things that he doesn't like in life.
I always said I don't like cold weather, cold food, cold heart, and cold.
You sure you want to keep calling him a good guy? I really do recommend checking out the documentary and, of course, reading the book Conspirituality, which I do keep on quoting in this video. Once again, going back to that question I asked you before, if you go to a Bikram yoga class or if you go to a hot yoga class, because if it is indeed a Bikram yoga class, you may want to click on some of the links which I've got for you down below, watch a documentary, read Conspirituality, and have a bit of a chat to the owner or the teacher there and see if they could possibly change the name to be hot yoga instead, and see what their response is, because you may want to find a different place to go and practice yoga. Then we get to more present day with the pandemic and eugenics in the wellness yoga sphere. Wonderful time to be alive in, isn't it? Where you can technically fact check everything on the internet, but then people keep on sharing all of this false nonsense, like peddling eugenics and ableism and saying that yoga can cure everything. There's even a book where on the cover it says that yoga can cure wrinkles. Sweetheart, shh. This is where things get a bit political as well, because Modi has even backed this up. And if you don't know anything about Modi and the RSS, maybe look into it a little bit further and you'll understand why this is the only thing that I'm bringing up, because I did get very scared when working on this video. The old Sandow tune of purifying divination through yoga and spiritual practice delivered the terrible conspirituality effects on India's COVID response. Researchers now believe that one of the world's worst super spreader events occurred at a yoga-oriented religious festival in Haridwar in the spring of 2021. The Kumbh Mela is a celebration of ascetic teachers and practices and has roots going back centuries. Millions of pilgrims gather at intervals dictated by astronomers to give alms, partake in rituals, and listen to sermons. The 2021 festival was originally scheduled for 2022, but in June of 2019, new astrological insight prompted the date to be moved up. In a stunning display of institutionalized conspirituality, Modi's government ignored the pleas of epidemiologists and public health officials and forged ahead with the plans, even as the pandemic surged. After the festival ended, a region 1,000 kilometers south of Haridwar reported a 99% infection rate among returning pilgrims. Researchers later found that prior to the event, cases in India-wide were just under 100,000 per day, but spiked sharply to over 400,000 per day at the end of the festival, then fell to 125,000 a day a month after it wrapped. While the yogis extolled virtues of deep breathing against all illness, COVID victims suffocated on stretchers on the streets outside of bedless hospitals as oxygen canisters sold out. I think that people like to forget just how many people have passed away from COVID and how many people have been deeply impacted by COVID, including becoming disabled, including suffering so very much. And there are still people to this very day that are saying that yoga can cure long COVID. If you are going to try and comment that on this video, I'm going to block you, because stop it. I feel like I have to say it just in case. Doing yoga does not mean that you never have to go to a doctor or that you never have to get a vaccination in your life. There's also issues when it comes to scientifically measuring the benefits of yoga, because there are so many different types of yoga that people can do. There are so many variables. Is it because people are doing exercise that they're healthier compared to people that aren't doing exercise? Like, there are just a lot of variables at play. So even when I was trying to find scientific research backing this up, or trying to back people's claims up, the science isn't all that great. Like, there are definitely benefits to doing yoga, but it's not a cure-all. When I was Googling this book even says that yoga can cure cellulite, the flu, migraines, shin splints, and wrinkles. The ultimate cure-all, because if yoga can't cure what's, quote, wrong with you, then you are deeply wrong psychologically, and it's a karmic repercussion on you. It's this sort of stuff which I take deep issue with. Conspirituality, again, the soft eugenics of modern yoga and wellness, which echoed with the kind of now depoliticized body fascism which was over a century old, was being laundered through aspirational consumerism so that its sexist, racist, and violent implications were almost invisible. These were techniques by which we could constantly judge ourselves by possible ideals of physical and moral fitness and perform our virtues or confess our sins to dominant figures who held charismatic power. Those authorities obsessed us with a warmed-over version of the 19th century pseudoscience of physiognomy, where the appearance and performance of one's body revealed their social value. We didn't recognize the ableism that could easily curdle an otherwise wholesome yogic worldview, especially through the influence of American individualism. The twisted message was that if a person was injured or disabled, they were revealing the karmic punishment of their own unprocessed trauma. We didn't recognize the eugenics theme running unconsciously through all of that flaws embodied should be identified, corrected, and bred out of existence. They no longer troubled the advancements of human evolution or the conscience of the privileged. Remember how I talked about Yogi Bhajan earlier? Well, apparently he selected Katie Griggs to be his protege.
I only briefly was with Yogi Bhajan in the several years before he died. And he sent me over to Yoga West and he said, you're going to teach these women's classes 5 days a week.
How did you receive the name?
I got mine actually directly from Yogi Bhajan.
That's the name that the master gave to me.
She kind of wraps up all of the things that we've talked about into one person, and I do also need to note that she was herself as well, so there are layers, but
she wanted money.
Part of my job on the planet is to kind of break the caricatures of spirituality. We call it spiritual materialism. Bhajan taught us that if you are serving in this age, it's impossible for you not to make so much money, have so much prosperity beyond the beyond the beyond.
You can always break the cycles of it. It doesn't mean that she should have done practically anything that she actually did do. She bundled up cultural appropriation, where she wore a turban improperly, by the way.
And even the article of faith of a turban, right? It's seen as a sacred symbol. And for her to wear it with her hair sticking out is bastardizing the article of faith.
She was a apologist whilst also claiming to be this staunch feminist, saying things like this.
Historic figure. And he remains a historic figure. And, I'm not like spending my days trying to figure out whether George Washington was, doing some things that I wouldn't agree with in 2021. I just don't think that's productive.
Guru Jagat made the comment, so what? It was 1969. Everybody was having.
They're preaching feminism. They're preaching woman is CEO, boss, babe. Like, they're preaching all this stuff, but at the end of the day, they're backing somebody who very clearly at least had a checkered past.
She was heavily on the side of conspirituality, believing that COVID didn't exist and that she didn't need to get a vaccination, which she also preached to people that followed her.
A double downing on the COVID denialism and anti-vax stances.
And she would have parties, and I heard that she would pass around ivermectin to people. Just irresponsible stuff.
And she praised capitalism and individual, all rolled into one person. She sought to continue the work and uphold the name and representation of Bhajan, even though, as I shared earlier, and only briefly, he was an absolutely terrible person. But she was still an absolute apologist. But in my opinion, you can't be a feminist and defend someone like Bhajan and go saying that you are into girl boss feminism. This is again why I take a lot of issues with girl boss feminism, alright? I don't like it.
They're pushing feminism, they're pushing boss babe, woman is CEO, and like, you can do it, it's all about you.
Continuing the lineage of Yogi Bhajan's teachings is we're creating a whole new archetype of feminine leadership, and that leadership comes from a space of radiant, embodied, powerful, poised, consolidated energy. And when you start to cultivate that, the whole universe will bow at your feet.
She also had celebrity followers like Kate Hudson, Alicia Keys, and Russell Brand.
Another fun fact, Alicia Keys is an active member of the Kundalini yoga community here at Rama in Venice, California. Kate Hudson's a fan too, by the way, and if it's good enough for those amazing ladies, you could definitely say I'm interested.
She claimed that Bhajan gave her the name Guru Jagat, but severe doubt.
Katie is, in fact, referred to as Guru Jagat as early as 2004, which is before Yogi Bhajan's death.
The adopting of spiritual names in 3HO is very easy to do. You can request a spiritual name online for a low suggested donation. that's it. There's no magic to it.
She founded the Rama Institute. Turning a Kundalini yoga studio into a multi-million-dollar commercial empire, she combined the mastery of social media with charisma, humor, and a brand of Cardi B-style feminism that resonated with millennial women. She's been compared to Elizabeth Holmes, but if Elizabeth Holmes did yoga. Like, when you watch a documentary about her, Breath of Fire, I believe it's called, you can understand, like, you can see how she's so real and she's so relatable. Scary, in my opinion. Not a good person, in my opinion. And like I said, she was one of the people in the yoga world that was saying that COVID wasn't real, that she wasn't getting vaccinated, and was telling this to so many thousands of followers. People loved her. Like, I don't think people can understand how fervent people were in their admiration of her. It was, ooh. She passed away in 2021 from cardiac arrest, but even in her eulogy, people were saying that she was an incredibly brilliant light, despite all of the harm that she caused. While she didn't people, she did so much other harm which had huge ripple effects on people's lives. And again, I really do implore you to watch that documentary. Of course, it's quite sensationalized, but it's talking with and platforming the people. It's shot in a very good way. And it features a really great author, Amanda Montell, who, if you know the book Cultish, you'll appreciate it a lot. The Sandow effect. No pain, no gain. The body can and should be purified. Your physique and posture are signs of your moral character and spiritual development. The enlightened person stands up straight, having freed himself from his messy history. He is a light to the nation. This ideology has saturated the modern yoga movement. If you can't get into a pose properly, then there's something wrong with you, psychologically, on a deep spiritual level. There is something wrong with you. And you're never going to achieve proper enlightenment in class unless you can get into these poses the way that the instructor tells you. In the book Conspirituality, they talk about their personal experiences facing into this and how it made them feel less than. And if you are disabled in any way, if you have a chronic illness, or if you need whatever sort of support, it will make you feel like you are a lesser person, like you are unworthy, with the way that some teachers, I repeat, some teachers, definitely not all teachers, have got this sort of mindset of this is the only way to do yoga, rather than having a more adaptive approach. If your teacher tries to tell you that yoga can cure your chronic illness or your disability or anything that is wrong with you, run. Leave. Don't go back. Oh my God, I thought that flower in the wind was someone looking in the window. Oh my God, I got so scared. There was another woman by the name of Anna Forrest who insisted that how a student performed yoga postures was a reflection of how they lived their life. Everyone felt relentless criticism from Forrest, which meant that getting her approval felt emotionally orgasmic, but achieving what she demanded was nearly impossible. This led to a steady rhythm of emotional breakdowns in the group. When the student would collapse in tears, Forrest's intuitive powers seemed to be confirmed. Then she would pivot to the role of comforting mother and gentle guide, leading the prodigal child toward her blessing. It's really abusive, icky stuff that some of these teachers have done. It's not good at all. It's so emotionally and psychologically damaging to students. And I'm sure that there will be some of you who are remembering when you weren't able to get into a pose properly, or felt like you weren't allowed to do yoga with everybody else because of your disability and how you got viewed as lesser than, and all of this internalized messaging because of a bad experience with a yoga teacher. Once again, there are so many teachers that are making sure that yoga is properly inclusive for people, as it should be. Of course, there are different levels in yoga, and in my opinion, like, the beginner stuff should absolutely be accessible to everybody. As Mary Higgs shares in this article, she faced severe discrimination and was nearly completely turned off yoga because the teachers didn't know what to do with her. Like, she needed to have adaptive yoga, but now she's gone on to become an adaptive yoga teacher. And like I said right at the start of this video, there are so many good people that are doing all sorts of good stuff in the yoga space. So once again, I'm not saying that everyone that teaches yoga is bad, because that's not the case. There are just sadly some people who have caused a lot of harm to others. Let's wrap up this very short video so I can finally have lunch, because it's 2 in the afternoon and I've been filming since 11. Did you know any of this? Did you know all of it? Because if you're involved in the yoga world, I'm sure that you may have heard of some of this stuff. For me personally, I only knew about the cultural appropriation because, like, 2010s, like, I saw Namaste in bed all over the place. Yoga just just wasn't working for me, but Pilates I clicked with straight away. And did you know that Pilates began as a prison workout? Because yes, it really did. It was even inspired by cats, which also probably explains why Pixie likes to roll around on the floor when I do my Pilates. It was never meant to be this rich, bougie, Lululemon wearing sort of exercise. It was so that people could do a proper workout whilst they were in a confined space. And Conspirituality is still in the Pilates space as well, because people keep on trying to say that Joseph Pilates and fellow inmates who did Pilates, they never got the flu of 1918. They never got sick. Just a reminder, they were another Ireland, literally Ireland. That's where they were. Like, for goodness sake, that separation, I wonder why the flu never got to them. It's not because they did Pilates. It doesn't mean that you're immune to everything if you do Pilates, my goodness. But anyway, just a little fun fact for you in case you didn't know anything about Pilates, because prison workout inspired by cats. That's the one that I like. After all that I've shared, does this mean that you can't do yoga and that you shouldn't enjoy yoga anymore? No, not at all. Like I said, I wanted to shed a light on some of the stuff which doesn't get talked about, the stuff which really has constantly been pushed down to make sure that there's this mysticism around yoga, this reverence for people who have taught yoga, and the dangers that happen when those sorts of environments are cultivated. As the Catholic Church has shown, bad things happen when that's in place. And no, that's not me saying that you can't be Catholic either. It's just that there are bad things that happen when you hold on to these hierarchies and make it so that people can't speak out against things that happen to them. We can all agree, I believe, that that's not a good thing. And like I talked about at the very beginning, there are so many people that are making sure that yoga is accessible to people, to make sure that yoga is more of a community focus, because yoga is so much more, like I said, than just a workout. What emoji should you put if you made it all the way to the end of this video with your comment? Let me know, if you do yoga, do you prefer the movement aspect of it or the mindfulness? Or is it a combination? I mean, obviously, you can leave whatever little yoga person you want to at the end of this. You could leave the lotus flower if you wanted to. Or if you have been shocked by what I've revealed to you, the little smiley face with the cash coming out of its mouth, because wow, have we talked about a whole bunch of grifters in today's video, haven't we? Sadly, that's existed in the space. Again, not everybody. There have definitely just been some people that have done a lot of damage. I also want to tell you all to watch out if your yoga studio is selling things like doTERRA oils or any other MLM nonsense. I want you to try and find another place to go and practice, because the MLM space in the world of yoga is also booming, which is not good. MLMs are predatory, okay? 99% of people make nothing from it, so we don't like that here, and I don't want people to be taken advantage of. That's basically why I make the videos I do, to expose the ways that people have been taken advantage of and expose the people that have done bad stuff. Because you shouldn't warp something as spiritual and wholesome as yoga to be what these people have done. I think that we can all agree on that. I really want to thank my patrons, because I was very nervous to make this video. I have done so much more research than what you have seen in this, because there's a lot more bad stuff which has happened in the world of yoga where it was genuinely unsafe for me to talk about it, and my patrons have definitely helped an awful lot. And I have to say an extra special thank you to my top tier Trash Panda enablers: Alyssa Pisani, Birgit, Carrie Quake, Danielle, Jam, Laura Bell, Megan Connolly, Mila Gauthier, Stella Sapiente, Tammy Poitres, Tim Long, Tonya Banier, Veru, Cat Mama. We recently had our monthly catch up, and that was really, really good. And yeah, I will see you lovelies next time with probably a more fun video. Let's have something a bit more fun and lighthearted, hey? Especially when we've just seen the inauguration happen. and this thing happening? What? We don't need this sort of stuff happening. It's very scary. Anyway, I'll see you lovelies next time. Bye. Man, I feel really grossed out.